Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Uncommon Comedy Podcast. I am your host, Brian Apprille. All episodes are available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And you can also find us on Facebook as well. So if you want, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Follow us on Facebook at Uncommon Comedy, on Instagram at Uncommon Comedy Tour, and on YouTube at Uncommon Comedy Podcast. Say that 5 times fast. All right, we're going to get into it today. Our guest today is a very, very funny comedian. Had a pleasure of knowing him for many years now, getting close to 20 years. We've done a ton of shows together. As a comedian, you've seen him on Dry Bar. You've seen him all over the internet. He has a very, very popular piece that we'll probably talk about called Three Little Pigs. And he's rolling his eyes in the background. I can see him already. We'll talk about a bunch of different things with him, but he performs all over the country, all over the world, actually. And he's very, very funny. Please welcome comedian and writer John Branyan.
You know, Brian Apprille, the people who are just listening to this on the podcast are not actually seeing the intro video that goes along with that music.
That's true.
And that's a shame. You need to plug your kicking video because all the people that are listening on the podcast can't see it. And you need to mention that.
Yes, it is a kicking video, and you can see it if you watch the podcast on YouTube. Yep. That would be kind of odd to just describe it. Okay, here's a definition of uncommon and a dictionary, and
let's do it. Kind of weird for
the audio podcast.
Let's do a verbal recreation of your video.
That would
see what we're made of.
Look at all the subscribers go away, and that would be kind of funny, actually. I'm certainly not opposed to that. Truthfully, well, welcome, John. Pleasure to have you. Now, what I love about John, and I'll even say it to you since you're here. What I love about you
might as well,
is your act is the fact that you're so considerate and that you mute your cell phone, which is something I really love about you.
Got it.
That is one of the best things about you. No, what I really love about you is your act is very smart. It's very clever. You have great moments of high energy, physicality on stage. And I always find myself watching you go, I wish I wrote that. I think that's like one of the best compliments you can give somebody. It's like, I wish I wrote that because it's just so good. So,
Shucks. Yeah. Shucks, Brian. Thank you.
Glad to have you on the show. So, we go back a little bit of a ways. We had some war stories and things of that nature. But let's enough about that for now. Who inspired you to get into comedy?
I have always been fascinated by comedy and making people laugh and people that are funny people from the time I was really little. My earliest memories are being drawn to people who were funny, people in my family. When I was young, I would watch stand-up on television. If I was changing channels or whatever, and I would come across stand-up, I would watch it. I didn't understand all of it because I was a kid, but I knew that there was laughter, and I was drawn to it. And I had the earliest memories that I can have of performing stand-up is my mom had a bridge club when I was a kid that met once every 3 or 4 months. They moved to different people's houses and they played bridge. It's a girl thing. It's a thing that older women do. It's a card game. So I would be relegated up to my room when mom hosted bridge night. And so I would get my PJs on and I would go to bed, and I would hear the ladies all downstairs, and they were playing cards and having their snacks and drinking coffee and all the stuff that women do when they play bridge. And then my mom would come up and she would say, "Hey, John, come downstairs." And so I would come downstairs and I would stand in the middle of all of those card tables where the women were playing. And mom would say, "Tell that joke that you told us this afternoon." And so mom would have me come down and tell jokes to the ladies in her bridge club.
Wow.
Well, and I didn't know that was unusual. I thought that that's just what happened. When mom had bridge over, then the boys would come and tell. I thought that was part of normal life. And it wasn't until I looked back at it and went, yeah, that's a little unusual that you have you have comedy chops at age 6. But I
It's a little unusual that your mom is running an illegal casino in your house too.
It wasn't illegal. It wasn't illegal. All of the proceeds went to a good cause. And
the John Fund, which is always a good cause.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So at 6 years old, you're out there working it. And that did you have any did you see stand-up comedians later, like Bill Cosby or the Smothers Brothers, or did you see anything like that kind of made you like get a little more into it?
Yeah, I watched. I never intended to do it, so it didn't grow up with the idea I'm going to be a comic someday. I never had that idea, but I watched the Smothers Brothers, certainly, Flip Wilson. I listened to Steve Martin. Bill Cosby was an influence. And then a little later on, Jonathan Winters, Robin Williams. And again, not necessarily stand-up, but just funny people.
Mm-hmm.
And I paid attention to the way that they communicated. And I don't mean to imply that I was studying them, but I was influenced by them when it came time for me to do things in school. The book report that I did in 7th grade was a project. I was supposed to report on Harry Houdini's biography. I read Harry Houdini's biography. I had to do a book report. And our group decided that we were going to tell the story of Harry Houdini's biography while we were performing a magic trick. And so I invented this character who was like this really clumsy magician. And my act was that I would go and do magic tricks, but they didn't work. Like I tried to bake a cake in a hat, and I was breaking eggs and putting flour in it. In the class, you got to remember, Brian, this is 7th grade, okay? So don't be too judgmental. I wouldn't try to do this act now in front of a comedy club audience. But at the time, it was killer. I mean, none of the other people in the class had a comedy aspect to their book reports. And so that was a moment for me when I went, holy cow, I didn't know the term killing at the time, but I was like, I'm really doing well. I mean, this entire class is laughing. The teacher is falling out of her chair, and I'm doing this on purpose. And that was the thought that I had. I'm doing this intentionally, and it's working. And that was in 7th grade. And so after that, I sort of geared all of my presentations towards the aspect of trying to make people laugh. Again, I wasn't doing it as a professional comedian. I just really liked the power of being able to command attention by being funny.
Did the teacher give you the stretch sign? You were doing so well. She's like,
no, that's not saying. Like I said, it was very primitive. It was very primitive comedy, but for the time and for my age, it was a formulative moment for me when
you were hooked at that.
Yeah, there's something magical about being able to bring laughter to people, and to do it on purpose. That was the thing that was so satisfying for me, was that I wrote that material in 7th grade. I conceived of what I would do, what I would say, how I would deliver this. And I thought, this will make them laugh. And it worked. And it was magical.
So I think it was Steve Martin's autobiography where he was talking about kind of the same thing, where he would just be funny in class. And then all of a sudden he got that reputation. And so people started expecting him to be funny in everything that he did. And it put this pressure on him. Did you find the same thing?
I guess I didn't think of it as pressure. but there were definitely moments when I would be on my way up to do a speech or leaving my desk to go up to the front of the class, and I would hear somebody say, "Oh, John's going up. I can't wait to see what this is." So there was an anticipation, because I sort of had a reputation of always doing goofy things or funny things.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you just got their names, put them on an email list, sold them a couple of drinks while they did it. So
yep. And eventually, and told them I started
follow you on Twitter.
Right. I closed every speech with, "Don't forget to tip your wait staff." Yeah.
Try the pizza triangles.
Yeah. Try the pizza.
I'll be here all year.
The wings. Yeah. I'll be here. Hopefully I'll be here all year.
Yeah. So you go through school and all that. So do you remember your first show for, not in school, your first quote unquote stand-up show that you did?
Yes. It was a open mic in Indianapolis, and I had 2 minutes. I had absolutely no idea how to do stand-up. I literally called the club and said, "I think that I'm funny. How do I get on stage?" And they told me, you have to get on the waiting list. So I got on the waiting list. It took 3 weeks to get up on stage. Mm-hmm. And they put me up on stage. I had 2 minutes, and it was terrible, but it got laughs again. And I fully expected to bomb. I had no intention of doing this beyond that first night. I just wanted to get up and do it, to say that I did it, so sort of conquer that fear. And I got up, did it. And afterwards, the guy who was running the open mic, the regular, the seasoned veteran, he said, "That was your first time?" And I said, "Yeah, that was first time." He goes, "That was really good. You should come back and do this again." And that was all it took.
Wow.
He said, "Yeah, you got promise. You should come back again." And so I did. I came back again, and then I fell into the open mic scene, and you start to have your comedy buddies, and you all bring your notebooks in, and you make, you try your new bits, and you punch each other's stuff up. And I loved it. I loved everything about the working on material and trying out material and honing it. First time I ever did stand up, I didn't know that you were supposed to use the same material week after week after week. And so I would go in with a brand new, 3 minutes every time. Yeah. And one of the guys had to pull me aside. He goes, "What are you doing?" And I said, "What? I'm just doing my material." He goes, "That's not the same as what you did last week." And I was like, "Right. I thought you're supposed to write new material." I'm like, "No, you're a moron. You have to work on it." But
that's really common. I mean, that's really common that people think you have to, I did that already. So,
right.
I'm retiring that. Like you did it once. Like, you got to build the act and you tighten it and
right. We don't know.
Right.
You're watching other people do it and you have no way of knowing. You just think, "Oh, that guy's funny."
Right.
You don't know that he's told those jokes 100 times before.
Right. People think you just get up there and wing it.
Right.
And it's also, we started, you've been doing it, I think a little bit longer than I have. I've been doing it 22, almost 23 years.
1990 was my first open mic.
So you've been doing a lot. Well, yeah. So I was 97. So you've been doing it 7 years longer. And so it's not like there was a ton of internet or how-tos or anything like that. You just went up and just was like, "Does this work?" So right. Yeah. And it's not until someone says, "Hey, no, you got to develop that." And
right.
It's so different now. It's a really interesting to see the evolution of comedy and how much information's out there now. And there's all these courses and classes and videos and podcasts and all that sort of stuff. So how long did it take for things? How often were you getting up, and like, how long did it take for things to click for you to like consistently, you weren't having those up and down sets?
Right. I was fortunate enough that I had, there were 2 clubs in Indianapolis that were owned by a couple, a married couple, and they just loved comedy. They loved everything about it. They were actually present at the open mics, and they would come in and they would watch and things like that. And I thought that's the way it was all over the world. I thought that that's just what happened in comedy clubs. And it wasn't until later on that I realized that they were unusual in that. And so I had, I was a faithful open micer. Every opportunity I had to do open mic, I would get up and do it. And so I was getting up probably not often. I don't live in, it's not San Diego or Chicago or New York in Indianapolis. I mean, there's a scene, but back in the 90s, it wasn't, you couldn't get up every night. There weren't rooms.
Right.
And so I would get up about twice a month, probably, and do 5 minutes. And I did that for a couple of years because I had a day job. And again, I still wasn't thinking about becoming a comic. It was just a hobby. And one night I got up and I did my set. And I was at a point where I was saying, okay, I've got to make a choice. And this comedy thing, while it's fun, it's not worth the time and energy that I'm investing in it for what I'm getting back. Mm-hmm. And so I was at a point where I was literally it was going to be my last open mic. And the club owner came up afterwards and he said, okay, we're going to give you a week. I said, what? He goes, we're going to give you a week of, to MC. And I was like, oh, okay. And so they gave me a week to MC, and I was a decent MC in that I understood what the MC's job was supposed to be. And it wasn't my job to go and kill the audience. And it wasn't my job. It was my job to facilitate the show and make everybody welcome. So I didn't have a gigantic ego as an MC. I was pretty terrified. And I worked as an MC for another couple of years steady. And that was when it really took off, because the owner, Patty Perrin, booked the MCs for both clubs in Indianapolis. And I always had at least a week, sometimes 2 weeks. And at that time, it was Tuesday through Saturday. So there were 9 shows in a week. And so I'm up night after night after night for 9 shows, one after the other. And you know that when you get that kind of stage time, you develop really fast, because especially on the weekends, Friday and Saturday, there were 5 shows on Friday and Saturday. And so you can make a change in this show and try it at the next show. And then you got another show after that. It's the late show, which doesn't matter how you do, but it's still a rep. And so that was when it took off. Once I started working regularly for the club, I got a lot of stage time. And then I started being, deliberate about my material. I taped every show. I listened to it, and I was objective enough to go, yeah, that's not working the way it's supposed to work. I didn't listen to my tapes and go, man, I'm awesome. I kill every time I get on stage. I was much more accurate than a lot of the comics that I've run into sometimes since then.
Well, that's a really important thing too. It's to be realistic. I always say don't be delusional for both good and bad. Like you said, don't say I killed every time, and then if you don't do well, oh, that audience was terrible. Right. No, it's your job to make them laugh. You were, I mean, unless they were playing volleyball or something, if it's at a club and they're expecting to see comedy and you go up and you don't deliver, that's on you.
Right.
I mean, there are exceptions, they've been there 4 hours for some corporate thing, like there are always exceptions, but I would say 99% of the time, 98% of the time, whatever, it's on you.
Right.
And it's not the crowd's fault. So there are times you're like, they're just dead and there's nothing I can do, but it's nice though that you actually had club owners who cared enough to like help groom you. Did they give you advice on like, we like this, we like that?
Nope.
Okay. See, because when I started in Boston, there was a club called the Comedy Connection, which was the A Room, and they would have national headliners in, and their open mics. The manager of the club would sit in the audience during open mic, and he would take notes. And then after every show, if you wanted to, he would give you notes and feedback about your set. And so he said, okay, I like this. I don't like this. This is the type of comedy we like here. If you want to work on this, and leave out this, we'd love to have you come back. Call me next week. If not, see ya. We'll see you in 6 months or whatever.
Have a great life.
Yeah. And so then they would groom you, and then it would be like, okay, now you'll get a guest spot on like a Tuesday night. And then it was, you work your way up. And so they would help groom you to be the comic that they wanted for their club, which was a really nice thing. So to get that feedback from somebody, because otherwise you're just spinning your wheels kind of going, I don't know what's working or where to go.
Well, they had they had two really, they were both considered A rooms. And the Indianapolis clubs were rooms that people would come to, the headliners would come back to even after they had already made the break, to television and movies. You would get guys like Brad Garrett would still come back and do Indianapolis even after he was on Everybody Loves Raymond. And so they had that reputation. They were really good clubs. And they didn't tell me what to do or what not to do. It was all gauged strictly on what happened with the audience. If the audience was happy, then you were doing your job.
Right. The
only stipulation they had for the openers was you had to be clean, and you shouldn't talk to the audience. You don't. It's okay to ask about birthdays and things like that, but you're not going to be the guy who goes into the audience and and chats them up about where they're from and what do they do for a living and all of that. But that was it. Everything else was just based on your
performance.
Yeah, your performance.
And for people who don't know, an A room is just basically it's the highest. It's how they label the quality of the room and like the talent level. So A is obviously the highest. You have A, B, and C rooms usually. A C room would be a bar,
a Stuckey's, a bowling alley.
Yeah, bowling alley or something like that. B room would be like a restaurant, the back room of a restaurant or whatever. And A room would be like an actual established high level club where national acts come through. The Jay Leno's, the Ray Romanos, the Brad Garrett's, that sort of stuff.
Right.
Just for people listening, because we like to inform here.
Yeah.
So what is the best piece of advice you ever received about comedy?
Oh, that's easy. Tom Naughton. Do you know Tom Naughton?
Not by name.
That's okay. Was going through. He was middling in Indianapolis.
So that's the second spot in a show.
Yeah,
so open middle and a headliner.
Right. I was opening, and he came up to me in between or after a show, middle of the week, I think. And he said, "Can I give you a piece of advice?" He asked, and I was green enough that I didn't know why he was asking. I didn't realize that comics have this code that it's improper to go and tell another comic, to presume to tell another comic something that might help his act. I didn't realize that was taboo, but he did. And he came up and said, "Can I tell you something?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he said, "You talk too much." He said, Your premises are good and your jokes are solid, but you're not getting the laughs that you could give because you just talk too much. You have way too many words." And I didn't know much about stand-up. I was a writer, and writing is not the same as stand-up. Stand-up is spoken and writing is written. And so I gave a lot more detail than I needed to for my talking. And so he took me back in the green room and he said, "We're going to, let me hear your first joke." And I told him the joke and he wrote it all out, and he just took a pencil and goes, "Oh, we don't need this. We don't need this. This word can be that." And we just rewrote everything. And it was easily the best piece of advice I've ever received, because it's right. And I have thought of him often when I'm putting bits together. I've thought about Tom in my ear saying, yeah, don't talk too much. Just, and once I sort of retooled my brain to the idea of as few words as possible. The ideal number of words is 0. If you can get to the point where you're making people laugh because they are so in tune with what's going on and where you're going, all you have to do is just kind of look at them and they bust up. Then that's the goal. The goal is to get to 0 words.
Yeah, that's a really good goal. And so many people forget about physicality and act outs and all of that. And it's a great tool because you can use it to extend, or like I said, you can just do it, just a look that can then get you a laugh, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
So what is your writing process? Because I would say you are a very prolific writer. You write constantly. You have all these great ideas, and you come up with such amazing joke. Like the flippin' joke is just you'll have to look on YouTube or on John Branyan's got a Dry Bar comedy special out, actually, drybarcomedy.com.
It does.
And it's John Branyan, Branyyan. Sorry, my brain doesn't work good. So John Branyan, Branyyan, and you'll see his flippin' joke in there. But like, you just see all sorts of jokes like that. So what is kind of your writing process?
The most important thing I do is I still hang around funny people. I'm still drawn to funny people, and I'm just a student of anybody who is making other people laugh. I pay attention to everything. I pay attention to what they say. I pay attention to the way they hold their head. I pay attention to what they do with their hands. I watch all of it. And the other thing that I do is I keep a notebook. I use Evernote, and because humor for me doesn't always show up in any sort of completed form. A lot of times it's fragmented ideas, or it's a thought about something that somebody said or something I overheard. It's a sign that I saw. It's just a fragment of an idea. And so I write it down, or I record it with a voice recorder. And those two things are invaluable, because I don't have writer's block anymore, because I don't ever sit down and look at a blank sheet of paper or a blank computer screen and go, okay, what's funny? Because I've been paying attention, and I've got a notebook. So I already have some ideas that are funny. Now it's just a matter of pulling those things out and starting to process them. And so the process is fairly simple. That is, it occurred to me a few years ago. I would get the question, and you probably get this question too, Brian. People will ask you, how do you think of your material? They may ask you that. How do you think up your jokes? How do you think up your jokes? And my pat answer was, I don't know. They just come to me. But I started thinking about that a while back, and I said, I really should have some idea of how this happens, right? I mean, right. I should be able to, at least for my own sake, I should be able to kind of put this in some sort of a form, because I'd like to be able to do it on command. I'd like to not have to wait for inspiration, but sort of force it to happen. And so I started paying attention to what was happening inside my brain when I was being funny. And what occurred to me is that humor can only happen when there's two ideas. The big revelation for me is that comedy is not about trying to think up a funny idea. It's about finding two ideas, and any two ideas have the potential to be funny. It just depends on how they're connected. So if you've got two ideas, you have the potential for humor. If you have one idea, that's not enough. You can't be funny with just one single idea. And the illustration that I have for that is there's a company called Honest, and they make various baby products, the Honest company. And my daughter sent me a picture years ago that was a picture of Honest diapers. So Honest diapers. And she said underneath the picture, if these diapers could talk, the things they would say. And that's how comedy works. You take the concept of honesty, which is not funny by itself.
Right.
And you take the concepts of diapers, which are not funny by themselves. But you apply honest and diapers and you put them together in the same. And now we have the possibility of comedy. Because you start asking questions about that. And comedy, that's the second revelation, is that comedy is always the answer to a question. And if you listen to Jim Gaffigan, you can listen to any comic, but Jim Gaffigan is the one that is the most obvious to pay attention, because he'll actually ask some of the questions and then respond to them. If you listen to Gaffigan's set,
right.
He'll go, what would it be like to order a Hot Pocket at a restaurant?
Right.
There's the question. And then he proceeds to answer that question.
Right.
And that's all comedy is. It's finding two ideas and putting them together and then asking questions about them. Well, what if this? What if these diapers could talk? What would they say? Who would wear honest diapers? How would you know? What would a dishonest diaper be like? What if politicians wore these diapers? What if the person in the witness stand had to slip on an honest diaper rather than putting his hand on the Bible? And you just ask those questions and respond to those questions. And that's comedy. Everything you mentioned, the flippin' Arkansas bit. That whole bit was the result of a conversation that I had with a guy that I was playing cards with over at my house. And his wife came over. And we're playing cards. His name's Jason. He's a funny person. And he shows me this thing on his phone. And it's a picture of the flippin' Church of Christ. He goes, look at this. And it's just a flippin' Church of Christ. And we both thought that was super funny. I said, that's got to be a real place. And so we looked it up. And by golly, it is. It's a real place. And then the questions just started to go. What would you call the burger joint? What would the library be called? What about the police department? Somebody call the flipping cops.
Right.
That whole bit was the result of just a barrage of questions and musings that we got from, the idea of flipping, which is not an adjective in this case.
Right.
And Arkansas, which is a location, a city. It's a city. And so those are the two ideas, the idea of flipping somebody off. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a location. And so those two ideas, that's comedy, people.
I love it. Anyone can do it. No, it's so good, though. When you say it like that, it makes it sound really simple. And the concepts are simple. Like that concept is simple, but coming through that and then all the other aspects of it, of phrasing and, timing and emphasis and word choice and and then where else can you take it? And again, you should definitely, if you don't know the bit we're talking about, go on to drybarcomedy.com, John Branyan, and watch that special. I'm so mad that you did that joke and found that joke, and I didn't. It just makes me angry at you. So
there's so much comedy out there in the universe, Brian.
Oh, I know, but
plenty for all of us.
No, I want that. It's just what you go.
For all of us.
It's so good. But no, that's a really good explanation of the writing process, because that's what it boils down to. I mean, there's always, there's the different elements of psychology in there. Whether it's embarrassment, recognition, superiority, all of these other aspects that you can do, and you can, we can get really technical into it and try to tie them all in. And the more elements of those that you hit, the more people will, the bigger, hopefully, the laugh should be. But the basis idea of that is just having those two different ideas, or those two different entities and bringing them together. I think that's really brilliant. It's a really simple way to recognize that.
Right. Any two ideas have the potential for comedy. Any two ideas have the potential for comedy. It just depends on how they're connected. And then to go along with the point that you were making, you talk about embarrassment or point of view is how I refer to it in the book. Okay. That there's passion that drives your comedy. And so how you decide which of these ideas you're going to use is determined by how much passion you have for the two ideas that you've put together. And so literally when I start writing, when I decide to get serious and write a bit, I will generate pages and pages of ideas on a topic. And it just happens. It happens automatically because I'm just combining ideas. And once you start slamming ideas together, you can put dozens and dozens of them together very quickly. And then you go through and scan, and a couple of pairs will kind of jump out at you as being, oh, that's an interesting idea. It'll just speak to you. And then those are the ones that you start asking questions about. Well, what if this and what if that? And who would use this? And when would you use that? And when would be an inappropriate time to do that? And you answer all of those questions.
Right. The who, where, when, why. And yeah.
But it's based on a feeling that you have. It's based on it's outrage or sadness or embarrassment is a big one, or happiness. I mean, the passion that you have for those topics that's what drives comedy. It's not jokes. Comedy rides a wave of emotion. And so if you have passion underneath your material, some of the dumbest, lamest, most insignificant things can become brilliant pieces of comedy because it's driven by the passion,
right?
Not the material, not the intellect. It's emotion,
right? And it comes through you, and people can feel that. Right. That's why I always say write what you're passionate about, and the other reason for that too is you won't get sick of saying it. Because as comedians, I've been saying certain jokes for 17 years, but I'm still just as passionate about it. I mean, I probably should update it, but I've twisted it for various reasons because it's come around in full circle. I used to do a Pictionary joke, or I still do a Pictionary joke. And the punchline that I had was, I always get the premise was I always get the worst answers to draw. And so I went through this whole thing and I ended up coming up with viral meningitis. And and it was a very passionate thing because I was always frustrated by these things. And I just had that joke for a while, and then I was going to retire it. And then I got sick and I got viral meningitis, which is hysterical to me. So I laughed when the doctor told me that. I literally laughed in her face like a Batman villain. Like it was. And so I do that. I still do that joke now, but only because I spent like 3 months trying to find the punchline that would work, and viral meningitis was the punchline that worked for all my criteria. I didn't want it to be something that was super common that would make people feel bad, like cancer or anything else. And so it had to be. I didn't want to go bubonic plague because I wanted to be realistic. But all these things that we go through to craft a joke, and then I said it, and then all of a sudden, boom, I get it, and I just laughed. So now I just say that, and then that leads me into my next bit about. Now that I know that my jokes come true, I'm going to do material about winning the lottery, so now I've taken it and I just use that whole bit to set up. And, again, it's an old bit, but I like it because it makes me laugh of the whole process that I go through. And it's for me, and it's something, like I said, that you're passionate about. And, and I think when you're passionate about certain topics, like I said, we go over, I mean, gosh, how many times do you say a joke in a year? I mean,
this year?
Well, not this year, like 3, on an average year. But and then you multiply that by 3, 4, 5 years, or however long you keep that in your rotation, and you better be passionate about it, or else you're gonna start to mail it in, and people aren't gonna laugh at it anymore, and they're gonna know because they can see that. So
they absolutely can. That's the phenomenon that I have noticed with a lot of younger comics, and by that I mean comics who haven't been doing comedy very long, not necessarily that they're chronologically young, but that people who are doing material versus people who are communicating truth about themselves is obvious. But to those of us who know what to look for, but because you've run open mics, there are people who get up and they do their material and it gets nothing. And then there are people who get up and they also do material, and they're both relatively new comics, but the guy who does material that you can tell is genuinely things that he's interested in and passionate about, and they're true about his life,
right,
or her life. They always do better with the audience. They always do better. And it's because I tried to describe it to one of these guys, these hapless souls, who was doing comedy. He got nothing. There was just 6 minutes of crickets in the room. And he comes back afterwards and he looks at me and he goes, "Well, what'd you think?" And I was sad. It's like, you can't hear nothing. You can't hear the crickets. But I said, the problem is that you are delivering material, and we can tell that you're delivering material. Nobody came in here to hear you tell jokes. That's a misconception that comics have. That the audience wants to hear my jokes. They don't. The audience does not want you to deliver material to them. The instant that the audience knows that you are going through material, they check out. They don't do it on purpose. It's just what happens, because they realize that you are reciting lines. You are reciting lines.
Yep.
And what makes a great actor in a movie is you don't realize that they're reading a script. They all are. They're all reading scripts.
Right.
But you don't. But they don't deliver it in such a way that you're like, well, obviously they're reading from a script. But comics do it all the time. Comics get up and march through their material and let the entire audience know, hey, I've told these jokes many times before, huh? And all their mannerisms are not natural. Their voice inflection is not natural. Everything about what they're doing is false. And even if the material is good, even if it's clever, funny material, it's not going to work because it's not genuine.
Right. People can see right through that. And yeah, it's so important to be yourself. And there are times you hear premises and you're like, oh, and it just draws the audience right in. And even if it's not, even if it's not like knocked down hysterically funny, you draw them in, and that's really important. If you can get that with just what you're saying, once you start adding in the punchlines, like you're golden.
Yeah. Well, I've asked people if they think it. They've asked me, why didn't this work? Why didn't that work? And I've asked them, do you think it's funny? And a lot of times that throws them. Do you think it's funny?
Right.
And whoa. You don't, do you? You don't think it's funny. You told that joke because you thought the audience would think it's funny. And that is never a good reason to tell a joke. That's insulting to people.
Right.
And they can tell. If you don't think it's funny, then don't say it. But if you think it's funny, go for it.
Right. You have to be authentic, and you want to display your sense of humor, and again, not what they want to hear. And that's so important. It's funny. What comedian makes you laugh? Besides me, of course.
Besides Brian Apprille, nobody. I've become an easy laugher. I didn't used to be, but I've become an easy laugher. John Mulaney makes me laugh. Jim Gaffigan makes me laugh. Brian Regan makes me laugh. Bill Burr makes me laugh. Jake Johansson makes me laugh. There's a lot of them. I think Chris Rock is funny. I think Bill Cosby still is funny. I mean, it's a shame it's a shame that all of the stuff that has happened in his life has tarnished his legacy. But he's always funny.
Right.
You can always, if you didn't know anything about what has happened to Bill Cosby and you just went back and watched it ignorant of his, you would laugh.
Right.
There's no question that it's funny. I think that, gosh, there's so many. There's a lot.
What's some good ones? Yeah, John Mulaney's one that not a lot of people know. Although he's starting to really get up there now, and people are starting to know him a lot more.
Nate Bargatze.
Mm-hmm.
He's got Nate fascinates me. I just think that his, he just gets up there and talks. Nate's a guy who, if you want a lesson on how to just get up and be who you are on stage, I think Nate Bargatze is a pretty good guy to look at for that. Because I imagine, I don't know him really well. I've hung around with him a little bit, but I think that that's who he is on stage.
Nice. So now I get to come to my favorite question.
Also, Gary Gulman. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, you like Gary Gulman? Gosh, it's interesting to see Gary like blowing up the way he has, because I started in Boston, and Gary was started in Boston as well, and so I did so many awful shows with him.
Is that right?
We did a place called Angie's Clams. Like, it was this little like clam restaurant, and it was just, I mean, they're so awful, and which leads me right into my next question.
Yeah, Gary Gulman seems like the sort of guy who, I guess every comic would have this, but he seems like the guy who would have some really, really bad shows just because you're going to get up in front of audiences like maybe at Angie's Clams where they're just not going to be picking up what he's putting down.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I assume you have that as well. You're clean comic. You've always been clean, correct? Or
yeah.
Okay. So, what is the worst show you've ever had?
Oh, the worst show I've ever had.
I mean, we've had several together. We had a summer full of shows together that were awful. But
actually, Branson. There are several of them in Branson.
Yes.
Probably the. Okay, I'm probably going to have to go all the way back to my early days in comedy, because, as you know, you develop a thick skin after some years in this business. And so the shows that are awful when you're seasoned and you are a pro, they're not as awful as when you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
When you take everything personally. So the earliest, one of the earliest disasters was I was doing an open mic at a Holiday Inn, and this was on the southeast side of Indianapolis, and it was a pretty rough room. It was one of those things where you go in, you get on the list, and virtually everybody could get on the list, and so there would be 25 comics, all going to go up and do 5 minutes, one after the other. And it was a full room. So there was probably 110, 120 people in there, just everywhere in this lounge area. And because it was an open mic and they were mostly amateurs, it didn't have the comedy club structure. Mm. And so anything went. In the comedy clubs where I was doing open mic, you had to be clean. They wouldn't, it wasn't a strict no 4-letter words, but you couldn't just be off the wall vulgar, or else they would, because they were trying to groom you for MC work.
Right. And
so that you can't use any of that awful material as an MC. And so that it was a waste of their time, but it wasn't that way in the Holiday Inn. So the Holiday Inn, I'm close to the bottom. I'm like 18 of 20 or something like that. And each act that gets up is just a little more bass and a little more vile than the one that in front. And so it became, by the time they got 5 or 6 acts in, it was really just okay, if you thought that was outrageous and horrible, I'm going to do this. And so the comedy just went out the window. It now became, let's just say, outrageous things. And so it went like that. The guy right in front of me was built like a football player, a flat top football player build, wearing rouge, lipstick, long eyelashes, and a dress. That was what went up onto the stage in this room. And they just went crazy. That was all he had to do. He went up and they were already whooping and hollering and out of their minds. And then he had a bunch of street jokes that he told that were like one-liners, just these filthy one-liners that he'd gotten from a book somewhere. And he would tell that joke. And then he had a bicycle horn somewhere under his dress. And he would go, so he would hit himself in the chest. And it went, yeah, and he did that for 4 minutes, and then they introduced me, and it was so bad. I just the crowd went from just climbing the walls to dead silence, and I did my set to silence except for the hissing and some boos and some "you suck" and I remember I remember that was when I realized that the term flop sweat was not just a figure of speech. I literally thought that it was a figure of speech, but I had it just wet, palms were sweating, and I almost quit comedy that night. Wow. But I went back to the open mic at the club. And it was a little gentler environment, and soldiered through. So,
wow, that's. Thankfully, it was only 4 minutes of torture.
Well, I've had a similar experience after I was seasoned, though, where I was on a cruise ship, and the cruise ship decided that they were going to do a farewell show differently than they normally did it. And so the comics on a cruise ship get zero respect, which is fine. But they had a tumbler and a magician who kind of knew each other before they started working on the ship. A lot of cruise ship entertainers sort of run in the same circle, and so they know each other. I didn't know these two guys, but it was the three of us on the bill, and they had this. Each one of us was supposed to do 15 minutes in the show. And so the magician got up and he did a thing. And then the tumbler got up and he had a fat suit on that made him look like Pavarotti. And so that was his big close. He was, la, 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 la. He was pantomiming, singing Pavarotti and like flipping over. So he would just flip and land on his feet, and then he would get up and he'd flip and land on his thing. And the audience thought it was just brilliant. And then he and the magician had worked out this little act together. And so after he finished with that, the magician came out and they did a little 6-minute thing that was basically a simulated sex act. So you've got a magician who's having sex with Pavarotti, in front of, it worked this out. And then it was me, and I was closing the show. And I couldn't follow that. It was, I didn't have material to follow that because I am a monologist. I tell jokes. I do monologues. I didn't have that visual, if I'd have gone first, I'd have probably been okay.
Yeah.
But following it, it was completely out of order. But again, I had, that one didn't have the same impact on me because I had some seasoning under me and I understood what was going on. And It's like, yeah, this is not an indictment on my material. This is just nobody, no comedian is going to follow that. Right. You can't. So.
Those are pretty good ones. Those are pretty good ones. So we're talking with John Branyan. He's a comedian. He's a writer. You can follow John on Twitter at John_Branyan, Brandyan. You can check out his website, johnbranyan.com. Instagram, right? Instagram is where are we? So
Yeah,
I'm all lost.
Instagram
at John Branyan, and YouTube is J Branyan, the letter J, not Jay. So check him out. You can also check him out on Dry Bar Comedy. Check out his special there. Just Google him on YouTube, all that sort of stuff. He's everywhere.
He's everywhere.
He's everywhere, doing everything.
He is ubiquitous.
So we, you and I have had a lot of terrible shows, and so we've learned a lot of lessons over the years. What advice do you have for comedians to not do, or what should they do to help their careers?
To help their career,
or just their act.
Yeah, I'm not a real club comic, and I never really was, and so I don't have a lot of helpful advice for how to live and move and breathe in the comedy club. So I'm not super well connected there. But as far as your act goes, I would say that the first thing you have to do is you have to think you're funny. We've already talked about this, but It's really important. You have to think that what you're saying is worth saying. And you have to find it funny. And that's my first indicator. The first thing that I care about is, okay, does this make me laugh?
Right.
And if I'm laughing at my material, I don't see that as an ego thing. I don't see that as, oh, you must really have a pretty high opinion of yourself. No, that is the very least that I expect from my material, is that I'm going to find it funny. And if you are trying to structure jokes around topics that you think are going to be important to the audience, or if you're trying to write about things that you think the audience is going to find relevant, then you're on the wrong track, because each of us has a sense of humor given to us by our creator. And the purpose of that is to discern, to figure out what's funny, figure out where humor is. And the only indicator that I have is my own sense of humor. I have no idea what Brian is going to think is funny. So I just have to do what I think is funny. And sometimes we're going to agree. Sometimes you're going to say, yeah, that is pretty funny. And sometimes you're going to go, you're out of your mind. That's right. That's not funny. Que sera, sera. But if you are doing what you believe is funny, the passion is much easier to develop. You don't have to fake the passion. And then you just get up and speak it. Do you know Steve Roy? Have you heard that name?
Yes. Yep.
Did you read any of his stuff?
I did the Killer Stand-Up online. And
he has, his Killer Stand-Up stuff is worth checking out. Because the thing that resonated with me about that is he would say, think back to a time when you were talking to friends and they were all laughing. Think about what you were doing, what was going on when you were making people laugh. And he says, that's what you do when you do stand-up.
Right.
And it's just, when we get the idea that stand-up is some magical, mystical process that happens totally separate to everything else about our lives. I'm going to do stand-up now, so I need to morph into a stand-up. No, it's just an extension of who you are. It's just who you are.
Yeah.
Amplified a little bit and edited a little bit to keep you from rambling, but you have to be who you are.
Yeah. No, that's good advice. Just be who you are. Turn it up, and I always say the best comedy comes from truth, and then you just, embellish it as needed for comedic effect.
Yeah. If you think it's funny, that's the thing. If something makes me laugh, I will always write it down. I had a conversation yesterday with a guy, and he said, why are there no hymns? We were talking about church totally unrelated from comedy. We were talking about passivity in Christianity. And he said, why is it that we're talking about how Jesus said some very harsh things? Christ is pictured as this guy who's very meek and mild and gentle. And he wasn't. He said some of the most aggressive things that anybody has ever said. And this guy said, yeah, you don't hear hymns in church about the brood of vipers and the whitewashed tombs, and you iniquity and your heart overflows with evil. You don't hear those songs. Right. And I wrote it down. It's like, I said, somebody needs to write a song about the brood of vipers. And I don't know if anything's going to come from that, but it just struck me as funny. That's the point. Struck me as funny. And so I made a note of it.
I like that. I haven't asked this question to anyone yet. What is the weirdest place you've played? Like weirdest show? Either it's for a certain group or at a physical location.
Two of them that jumped to mind. The first one was I was in the back of a hay wagon with no amplification in front of a bunch of people that were eating like at picnic tables and stuff. And I literally jumped up into the back of a hay wagon and had to, hey, you guys, and they couldn't hear me, and it was awful. But then I did a show in prison. I've done several shows in prison, but this was the only one in prison.
For prisoners, not while you were in prison.
Not while I was personally in prison. Right. Not while I was incarcerated.
Yes.
And so this was actually back in where the prisoners were. This was back. Most of the shows that I've done in prison, they'll have like a room where they will bring the inmates in and they sit down in that room and then you do a show and then they go back. This one, we went back to where they were, and it was a giant. It looked kind of like a half of a gymnasium. If you picture like half of a gymnasium, it was about that tall. There was a balcony where you could, like a walking place where you could go up and the prisoners were walking around and around. And then back in the back of the room, there was a door, and there was this heavy like plexiglass wall, and that's where the cots were. And so like it's back here and it's over there. You could see all of these places where they slept. So you're literally back in where they live. And where I was doing my show was this dining area, and the tables were molded from concrete, like came up out of the floor. So you couldn't move the chairs or the tables around. They were almost like sculptures there on the floor. Okay. So I'm doing my show there. And then behind me, kind of off to the side, there's a half of a wall. There's like probably a 3.5 foot wall or something like that, comes up right up to your waist. And on the other side of that wall was a row of toilets. Just open toilets, nothing in between them. They're just sitting out there in the middle of the floor, right there behind me. And so as I'm doing my set, guys are peeing and taking a dump, like literally right there. And then on the back wall, where the toilets were facing, there were showers. Just shower spigots sticking out of the wall. This whole thing is concrete. And so there's just showers sticking out of the wall, drains in the floor. This is all open. There's no partitions. There's no doorways. It's all right out in the open. And so there's naked guys showering, and there's guys pooping and flushing the toilet. And I'm doing stand-up.
That's a pretty good one. I'm glad I asked that, because that was worth it. That was worth it.
Friend of mine, I went with several other comics, and one of the guys went into the solitary confinement area of the prison to do his comedy. And that was, I didn't go in there, but he said that it was like 3 levels. So there's like 3 tiers, and all it was a steel door with a little square window in it that had tinted glass. So you couldn't see anything in the window. So he literally performed for just rows of doors.
Wow.
And that was it. No feedback. He couldn't see the audience. And they probably couldn't see him either. That was just amplified so that, whatever got through there. But he performed for rows of doors.
That's
yeah. And I would have preferred that, actually, to the guys sitting on the toilet.
Yeah, I think I'd much rather just be in an empty space practicing, at that point,
right,
than that going on.
Yep.
We're going to run out of time soon, but I'm going to have you back on. We're going to tell some horror stories. We're going to do the Branson Days podcast, because we could do an hour easily on Branson, very easily.
We could do an hour on pizza.
Yes.
On the Mazio's pizza.
That's true. And the hotel that I stayed in, that was at a 45-degree angle, that had exposed wires and leaky faucets, and the air conditioner had no knobs, and you needed to get pliers and all of that. So much fun.
All the animal costumes and jumping on the trampolines.
And the just tell everybody really quickly, we spent a summer in Branson, Missouri doing the show, all of comedy, and we were in a theater that sat 400 people, and the biggest crowd we had, and I don't even know if you were there that night, I'm not sure.
I wasn't.
Okay, was 36 people, and that was on free ticket giveaway night. And it was that kind of summer.
I was so jealous that you got to work the big crowd.
But to be fair, you were the one that got to see the mother spanking the child right in front of you. So so we will talk about those in another episode.
I forgot about that.
Oh my gosh. And trying to keep a straight face while that's going on. So I got to ask you about the Three Little Pigs, because I feel like that's your signature bit. What can you explain a little bit of what the bit is, and what was the process like coming up with that, and how that all came to be?
Yeah. This Three Little Pigs was basically exactly what we talked about earlier. It was two ideas that came together and struck me as funny. One was I decided that I was going to read some classic literature, Pride and Prejudice and Little Women, and I was working my way through Dracula, through the original Bram Stoker's Dracula. And what occurred to me as I was reading it is, holy cow, that these people have a complicated language. English was a lot more robust and deep back then. And so there was a scene where a lady came into the room, and all of the gentlemen in the room stood up and basically said hello to her. And it took, a page and a half for them to basically say, howdy do, ma'am.
Right.
And it occurred to me, it's like, I am not smart enough to be alive during this time period, because just saying hello to people requires an enormous vocabulary. So that was the thought. And then the second thought that went with it was, okay, if you've got comedy is based on contrast, it's based on opposites coming together, and you either justify those opposites being together, or you take things that are normally associated and you break them apart and justify that. But it's all based on contrast. And so what's the opposite of complicated language is simple language. And so I thought, well, what's a simple thing? And I thought children's books. I thought a children's book where, each page has one sentence on it that's 6 words.
Right.
And I thought that would be the opposite of what I'm reading here in Bram Stoker. So those were the two ideas. And it just struck me as funny. It's like, what if this language appeared in a children's book? And that was the premise. So you take this highly complicated, convoluted language, and you write it in a children's book. And then the questions started to go, well, what kind of kid would even be able to digest a book like that? What sort of kid would read a book like that? And what would the story be like? And that got me to fairy tales, because in order to tell a story and have the audience from a comedic point of view, in order for them to follow along with you, they have to know the story. It has to be familiar. So you can't make up a brand new story.
Right.
Because they're not going to get it.
Right.
So it has to be a story that they already know and understand. And so I looked them up. What are the most popular worldwide fairy tales? And it's Goldilocks, it's the Three Little Pigs, it's Jack and the Beanstalk, and there was a couple of the Rumpelstiltskin is on there, but on all of those various lists, the Three Little Pigs was always like up at number one. So I reasoned, well, the Three Little Pigs is the one that's the most likely going to be understood by people, and so I just took the Three Little Pigs and I wrote it as if it was back in at least 1600s Elizabethan English. And so all of the, I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down, all of that stuff got expanded into this long, convoluted language. And I will tell you, I always try to communicate, especially to other comics, that I thought it was funny, but I didn't think it would work. And I'm not trying to be dramatic here. I thought that it would fail. I thought it's too long. It's too much. There's too many words. Tom Naughton was talking to me. There's too many words. And
it's it's like an 8.5 minute bit, isn't it? Somewhere around there.
Yeah. And I thought that it wouldn't work. I thought the audience is not going to like it. And so it was in my notebook, written out for a long, long time before. I just never did it because I didn't think it was going to work. And one night I got up and I was going through a phase where I still try to do something new every night. Even if it's just one or two lines, I try to do something new every night. I said, all right, tonight I'm just going to throw this Three Little Pigs line out. Just the opening line. And then they're going to stare at me and I'm going to move on and forget that it ever happened. And so I said basically what I just told you. I said, man, English used to be so convoluted, and I wouldn't be smart enough to read children's books back then. Can you imagine what the kids' books would sound like? Kids' book in 16th century English would be like, in times past or not long ago, there lived pigs in stature little in number 3, who being of an age both entitled and inspired to seek their fortune, did set about to do thusly. And I said that, and they went bananas. They just exploded. And I was shocked, and I wasn't prepared to do the whole thing because I didn't think it was going to work. And so I said to them, are you kidding me? And that made them laugh. I said, seriously? I said, I sort of know the rest of the story. Do you want to hear it? And they were like, yeah. And so I told the story badly. I remembered enough of it to where I could make it go, but I botched it and I misspoke things and I forgot lines, but even butchered, it still got this fantastic response. And so I was on the way home and I had a couple of friends with me and I said, I'm jazzed about this because I did it horribly tonight and it went fantastic. Right. So if I spend a little time working on this, this is gonna work. And so that's just the story, is that you just never know. You never know till you try it.
Right.
What's going to work and what's not going to work.
How long did it take you to memorize that?
Well, like I said, I didn't really do a great job of memorizing it until I found out that there was a reason to memorize it. And once I knew that it was worth my time, I wrote it out and I fixed up some of the stuff that wasn't good. And I set it into my phone. And then I had to drive up to Green Bay, Wisconsin to do a show. And so I listened to it on my phone and then listened to it and listened to it and listened to it. And it's a 5.5 hour, 6 hour drive to Green Bay. And so I had it pretty well after that. So it took 5 hours of pretty intense study to get to where I felt like I was competent. But I didn't really get smooth with it until I did it on stage a number of times. Right. Because, every time you do it, it gets a little sharper and it gets a little bit And it sort of evolved a little bit as I performed it. There were things that occurred to me as I was performing it that I would slip in. And so it got better as I did it. Because you know how that is. You don't think of everything when you're sitting down writing it. You know, you think of things in the moment.
And after repetition and repetition, you go, oh, I could do this here. And
right.
Yeah, because I get that question a lot too with the nations of the world. They're like, how long did that take you to learn? Right. I'm like, I listened to that song like 1,000 times.
Right.
You know? So, yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Right, but it's worth it. It's worth it because what the fact that it is so long and there is so much investment to doing a long memorized piece, that's the payoff. And there are, some of my favorite comics, like Richard Jeni. You remember Richard Jeni?
Oh, I love Richard Jeni. He was one of my idols. Absolutely. Love him.
Yeah, he's got a lot of kind of memorized things that he does.
Bob the Belching Gourmet, or
yeah, and it's inspiring because he's put a lot of work into crafting that.
And you have to be comfortable, I think, with the silence during the long parts, and then where the laughter is, the laughter is. You just have to be comfortable getting, like, for me, I know I have to get through 2 verses, 2 choruses until I get that huge laugh. Right. And with Three Little Pigs, it's like you have to get through certain parts of it in order to get to that, the second one where it's all S's and you just boom, 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 and then that gets a huge applause break, and you just have to be okay with that and get rid of that mindset of like, I need to laugh, I need to laugh, I need to laugh.
Right. That's a great point. If you have a comedian's mindset, then there's a tendency to not do things that don't result in a laugh every 15 seconds, like we're supposed to get. You're always thinking about your laughs per minute and how long's it been? But even that has repercussions. In it's not you. I don't speak in 6 laughs per minute.
Right.
I speak in there are many fewer laughs than that when I'm actually communicating. And so sometimes there needs to be, the setup, there needs to be a little bit of a lull, because that's what ramps it up to the next laugh. And there's it's a landscape. Comedy is a landscape of laughter. And so, you have to be comfortable with the audience not necessarily falling out of their chairs. And that's the other thing that the Three Little Pigs, that I hear a lot, is that people come up and they say, that was one of the funniest things that I've ever heard in my life. And I'm not meaning to discredit them, but it's really not one of the funniest things that's ever been written. Because if you time the number of laughs per minute, and you stack it up against some other bit of comedy, depending on how you measure the funniest things, it's not. But
I will say, in defense of that, though, just like a smart comedian, it builds. So once you get to the third pig, then the laughs start becoming a lot more frequent, a lot faster. So it follows the same guiding principle of your set and your act, a person set or act, where it starts off and it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds to the crescendo, and then boom, you bring them home. So
well, one of the things that is interesting to me, since we're talking comedy here, what's interesting is that that people have told me, I didn't understand a word that you said, but I could still follow the story.
Right.
And that's the other thing that it has going for it that's really powerful, is that people may not be catching every word, but they're still laughing because they recognize the story.
Right.
They're familiar with the story. And that's hilarious, because I don't even understand what he's saying, but I still know exactly what he's talking about. And there's something about that is just, it's hilarious.
Yeah, and it's such a great piece. And if people haven't seen it, you need to check it out. Drybarcomedy.com. Look for John Branyan. What is the name of the title? What is the title of it? Of your special?
Demeaning of Life.
Demeaning of Life. And again, if you want to follow John, you can follow him on Twitter at John_Branyan, YouTube at JBranyan, Instagram at John Branyan, and johnbranyan.com. That's BRANYAN. Dude, we could talk forever about comedy, but I want to get a little bit into the charity aspect here. Okay. John was very gracious to let me highlight another charity that I really like, another organization. They're called Love Thy Neighbor. They are at www.lovethyneighbormovement.com. They are San Diego based, but they do so much work for the Southern California and San Diego area. They have so many outreach programs for feeding San Diego, supplying clothes. They have so many things that they do, especially for the kids, getting bicycles and toy drives and just all these wonderful things. And they're an amazing group of people, head up by Ruben Torres, who I absolutely love working with and doing shows for. You can find them at Facebook at Love Thy Neighbor Movement. Twitter is at LTN Movement. Same with Instagram, LTN Movement. And you can check out their website at lovethyneighbormovement.com. Again, they inspire, empower, and bring value to the community and families all around all of them. They're dedicated to making a positive difference in the lives of people in the community by launching and engaging programs, events, and initiatives that will provide education, resources, tooling, and opportunities to the underserved members in the community. And they're a wonderful organization, and please definitely check them out. And
they're not afraid to use King James language either.
Exactly.
I respect.
You can recite Three Little Pigs to them, and they'll enjoy that. But John, thank you. I definitely, you got to come back on, because we could talk for another hour and a half about comedy and the insights of it and the horror stories that we've been through. And I think that would be a lot of fun. But thank you again for coming on.
You know how to get a hold of me.
I do. And you also have a book. Is that out currently? Your book out?
I do. You get a Kindle version on Amazon. Life is Hardy Hard.
And then you also have a podcast and a web series.
I do. I have a podcast, is the Comedy Sojourn. That's also on the website. And then the web series is the thing that you're part of.
Yes,
is that what you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
Talk about Starving Comics Quarantine Show.
The Starving Comics Quarantine Show.
Yep. You should check that out too.
Yep. That's generally every Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific.
Yep.
And
till we start working again.
Yeah, exactly. Then it'll be on Monday nights.
Right.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate you, and thanks again for coming on and sharing your knowledge.
Anytime, Brian. Good talking to you.
You too.